All right. So, do we want to just start with talking about like the chapters that we read? And yeah.
Should we talk about chapter 5?
Yeah, we could just talk about like
That works.
something like that. Okay. So, I don't know about you guys, but I found this chapter really interesting.
So did I. Yeah.
I really liked the part about like how children's books used to be like, don't do this or you're gonna go to hell, basically. Like, I think they said it was like to indoctrinate children, and it was mostly like the Puritans that did that, which was not surprising. But I thought it was cool to see like the progress of how they kind of came to be, because like they didn't really have children's books for a long time, and then they saw that there was like a demand for it, and then I think it was Newbery, like you know, the Newbery Awards. He was the one that he was like, oh, maybe there's a market for this. Yeah.
I always think it's really interesting to think about how they thought of kids back then,
Yeah.
like, as like just small adults. And I think about like going into the first grade class that I'm in right now and trying to think of them that way, and I'm like, no, they're like young souls. They have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
When I read how it was kind of like trying to like almost punish them in a sense,
Yeah.
like scare them, it kind of reminded me of like children's like songs, like when they're younger, like Ring Around the Rosie.
It's so messed up.
It's like it's kind of like the same correlation of just like,
Totally.
okay, let's not give them any joy.
Yeah. Isn't that about like the plague or something like that? Yeah.
I feel like all the stories are trying to like brainwash them because they seem so innocent, and it's like they keep wanting more and they just want to keep going back to them, but it's like secretly no.
Yeah.
Did you guys read any of the books that were like talked
Oh
about?
yeah, definitely. Like the Ugly Duckling and things like that. Rumpelstiltskin.
Little Women.
Yeah,
that
Little
was, like,
Women.
a favorite as a kid.
And like the Hobbit was like one that I read with my parents when I was in like 3rd grade, I think, which like wasn't intended to be a children's book, but it ended up being more of that like tone. So I think it's interesting to look at those and think of it in a different way, because I guess I don't really think of books, like, there are books specifically for children, but then there are other books, like, adults can read them, kids can read them, like, it's accessible to all age groups, so I just think it's funny to think of it as, like, strictly an adult book, you know? Yeah.
You didn't read them?
I didn't read them, no.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like looking through them, I was like, okay, there's at least one book of these I can write about, and I was like, no. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I saw the movies, but I didn't actually read the physical books. But I always like heard stories being passed on, which I guess that says something about what adults wanted from the books. That stories are being told about them.
Yeah.
For sure.
That is interesting. And I know they were talking about fairy tales and like Hans Christian Andersen, and some of those are really dark. Like, they're really messed up. Like, if you ever read the original Little Mermaid, she, like, dies in the end and turns into sea foam.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I do know that Cinderella one, they
Like,
like
based off of the
Step
Grimm.
sisters,
again,
like,
they like
cut their toes off.
toes off and their heels. Oh, it's disgusting.
I'm like, does that just, like, go over kids' heads? Like, they're...
I'm like, yeah, normal.
Yeah, it seems legit. Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of says something about how, like, kids almost believe, like, anything. It's just like, oh, yeah, that's normal. And it kind of leads into, like, how it was talking, I don't know about, like, I kind of read your guys', but like, mine was more, like, on why we need to, like, super evaluate books.
Oh, yeah,
And so it kind of, like, leads into, like, you know, kids are just going to think, oh, yeah, that's normal because the book said so.
Exactly.
And especially with, like, multicultural literature
Yeah.
that, like, like progressives, or not progressives, that perpetuates like racism in our society and stuff. Like, if you don't have conversations with them about it, then they'll just be like, okay, normal.
Yeah, right. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of read how to check for those issues in books. Like, what is the tone of the story? Like, is this person being presented as like the hero or the victim, or like looking at it from an outsider's perspective or an insider's perspective. And I thought that was interesting, like going and reading the other side, because I was like, I wonder. So I like looked up the author, and she's an African American author. She was born in Ohio in the 60s. So I thought that was pretty cool, because it showed like a very distinct connection for her to the subject matter of the book. So was pretty cool.
I really liked the article. I forgot what all of them were, but just things like even like tokenism and stuff. I hadn't thought about them before explicitly, and like maybe I'd noticed them if the teacher brought them up. But like they're in every single book that
seriously.
It's like kind of disappointing that I'm not like, this is a bad book. Like I can't have this in my classroom. But they're like all stories that we like, which is sad.
I think maybe like, not so much not having them in your class, but maybe like just having the conversation.
One of you guys said that in your post, and I really like that.
Just like, because I totally wish that some of the teachers that I had growing up would have pointed that out to me, so that I would have had the skills to do that now, kind of thing.
I think definitely with older students, especially if you're going to go and read like classics by Richard Wright, or if you're going to read pretty much any of Mark Twain's stuff, like, it says the N-word a lot in there. And unfortunately, like, that's just part of how things were back then. But you can't have a productive discussion about it. And, I mean, obviously you're not going to want to read, like, a book with the N-word in it to, like, kindergartners or something. But when you're in high school, you can have those discussions and talk about, like, why do they use this term? What was going on then? Like, look at the historical context and talk about it, because it is important to talk about those things rather than just, like, completely censor them, because otherwise what happens is, like, I don't know if you guys know the saying, like, those who, like, ignore history or something are doomed to repeat it. So that kind of helps with bringing awareness to the fact that, you know, we haven't always, as a culture, been accepting of diversity, which, you know, we've learned, hopefully, and we're continuing to have problems with it, but hopefully, like, I know, especially in Woodring, like, they definitely emphasize being able to have a classroom that is accessible for everyone, which I think is really important.
Definitely, I remember having a conversation in my 8th grade English class, and I don't remember exactly what brought this about. Maybe we were reading a book with the N-word, but I kind of doubt it, because my school district is not like that. But so we had a conversation about, is it appropriate to use the N-word? And I remember as a student having like this belief that, number one, it's not okay to use the N-word, but it's okay for rappers to use the N-word. And like, now that I think about it, it's kind of changing language and like using those words to like empower people. But I didn't have the language to say that as like a young student, so I didn't really know like what I was supposed to say. And the teacher just totally shut me down and was like, absolutely not, it's not appropriate, bottom line, no matter what. And I was like, all right. So then I went through the rest of school thinking it's not appropriate at all. You know? But I wish that those conversations were more, I don't know, open.
Definitely. And less, like, judgmental. Like, it sounds like that really shut you down. And that's unfortunate, because when you're talking about terms that have such a deep history and like a very painful history for a lot of people, like you want to be able to discuss those things and like open up that conversation, because if we don't talk about it, then like what are we gonna do? You know, people aren't gonna know. So yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I really liked the children's book that we read this week. And I thought it had some really interesting symbolism in it, like the fence, and she was talking about that, like pay attention to this throughout the story. And I was like, oh, you can see it progress throughout the story. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if she wouldn't have brought that up if I would have noticed that at all.
Yeah.
I think I would have. I really like the way that she set it up. I like how instead of like just asking questions, she was like, notice this, like this is what I see, this is what I think is important. I thought that was really, really helpful for me in going through it.
Yeah.
And it's good to know like how to prompt your students to think while you're reading and not just experience the story, but like have things in mind that you want to pay attention to, because then you can have like really meaningful discussions about it afterwards. So.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool. Like, I feel like I've seen someone read that book before, and like this was just like a totally new experience in how like you could use the book, and so I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
I had never heard that story before. I like really liked it though.
Yeah, me neither. I don't know when it came out, but I'm wondering if it was like after. It was probably after like I was elementary school age, but I think it's really funny because when I think back on it, I don't think that my parents really introduced, like, they didn't do it on purpose not to introduce me to like multicultural literature, but it just like wasn't a part of what we read, you know. And we had like I know in the, I can't remember if it was chapter 5, I think it was chapter 5, they were talking about The Snowy Day by Ezra Keats.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, we had that book. Like, that's one of the only books I remember that actually, like, had an African American as the main character. And I know as I got older, like, my mom would buy me books that were, like, more historical and, like, opened up those discussions. But I don't know if as, like, a kid we, like, actually discussed that.
Right.
I know that my parents would have, but I don't know. So I think it's important to not only provide those for your students, but like obviously when you have kids, like you want to have the same discussions with them.
Yeah. Did you guys grow up with like multicultural literature in your classrooms or at home?
I honestly don't remember. I'm Cambodian and I didn't have any children's literature for that, but my grandpa was a teacher, so he has like tons and tons of books about different cultures. A lot of them that I'm being introduced to now, so, like, it's funny because he, like, will buy a bunch of books and then skim through them and, like, tell me everything about all of them, but he hasn't actually read them. But it's like a library in his house. But when I was growing up, not really. More just, like, informational texts about Cambodia, but no children's literature.
Yeah.
But then I was a kid, so I didn't want to read them.
Yeah.
I don't think like I had like a whole bunch of books. I was like, oh yeah, that's like totally multicultural.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. Like when I was younger, books were just kind of like books. I guess I never really thought about what they were.
Exactly.
So I mean, like I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I had any. I grew up in Puyallup, like extremely white suburb town, and I don't remember one multicultural book. The thing is, my mom was a cultural studies major in college.
That's funny.
I know, it's hilarious. And she was a teacher. Nobody told me to follow her, but I did. And so I don't remember any multicultural literature in my home either. And I find that really odd because she was a cultural studies major and there were none in my house.
Yeah.
Maybe there were in my house, but my favorites, all of the ones that I can remember were.
Yeah. I guess a multicultural cultural studies major, it looked a lot different.
That's true.
A while ago.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, I feel like we haven't really been taking strides to like make conscious efforts until now, and then we have this whole major, and it's like, what is everyone else in Woodring doing for their students?
Right.
If this is like, it almost seems like the bare minimum, like, you know, taking these classes, and then there's everyone else that's not.
Yeah.
Right.
I feel like they should be required. I don't know.
Right?
I really enjoy like the classes that I'm in, and I feel like, oh my gosh, this brings up so many possibilities for me like, as a teacher to make my classroom a more accessible place for all of my students.
And that's the most important, which is the great thing about this major. And also, like, I've taken one sped class, but I feel like it was the class I'm going to use the most, but then I'm only required to take one, and it's like, I like that LLC focuses more on the student than, like, content.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. Yeah. And, like, I was going to say something.
We're talking about LLC. Okay. We can come back to it if you remember. Yeah. I just think it's really interesting. Like, I remember reading, like, Junie B. Jones, like, those books, and Ramona, and...
Well, even, like, Harry Potter.
Yeah, Harry Potter. Like, none of those, like, specifically mention having any, like, people of color, any diversity in them. And I think it's interesting because, this is kind of a tangent, but, like, they're, like, making a play about the Harry Potter books, or, like, it's, like, an extension of them, and, they had an African-American woman who was cast as Hermione, and people were like, oh, no, that's, like, not okay, blah, 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 and she was like, I never explicitly said that Hermione was white in the books.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't have a problem with it. So I just think it's funny because, like, I wonder if, like, as a child, if I envisioned characters as being white, even though they, like, weren't meant to be, just because that's what I, like, grew up around, you know? Like, that's interesting to me, though, because, like, I feel like maybe if I had more multicultural literature introduced, like, earlier on, that maybe it would be different, but I think that every child wants characters that they can identify with, and that doesn't happen enough. And I think maybe part of the reason that we didn't have those books was because they're not, like, the majority of what's out there, which is unfortunate, but,
That's how it is. I remember when Annie, the new Annie, came out. Have you guys seen? There's an African-American little girl playing Annie. And I went to a movie with my boyfriend's family he also grew up in Puyallup. They're pretty conservative, haven't had a lot of conversations like the ones we're having, to say it lightly. And we left, and we went to a movie, and we saw the preview for that movie, and we left, and his dad was, like, mad. And was like, Annie is supposed to have red hair. And I was like, I just wish that I had more of the language and the courage to have conversations when that kind of thing happens.
Kind of going off what you said, though, like just envisioning characters the way like we would perceive them, like it kind of reminded me of the video that we had first week when it was like test your bias. I think. And she was like telling the story about like there was this one boy and her father was like a crash, and then like the doctor was just like, I can't operate, and it was the mom, but then people just assumed that it was a guy, just because like that's what we're so used to, and so it kind of like went along the same line.
Definitely.
Yeah. Did you guys get confused?
So my mind kind of like went in all different ways, but I think it's because I was expecting something to happen.
Yeah.
And my mind like kind of ignored the doctor almost, and was like, okay, she's gonna say that the little boy is black because like she was like amping it up for like something to happen. Like, okay, my bias is gonna come out. Something's gonna be wrong. So I was like perceiving the boy that she was just gonna say I can't operate because the little boy was black.
Right.
And then she went off into the women. I was like, okay, did not
Yeah.
expect that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think that's just because I was trying to expect something.
Yeah.
So
I know. I instantly thought that the parents were gay.
I think it's still going.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we're good.
But I still thought it was a man doctor.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking too. I had actually heard it before, but then I had like forgotten. It was a really long time ago, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. And it's really terrible to think that like those like cultural norms are so ingrained in us that like you don't think twice about it, you know? And it's interesting to like be caught in that moment
Right.
when you're like, oh, you know, and having that realization. And I think that like we talk about this in my AMST 412 class, how people don't do well with discomfort. And when you're uncomfortable, sometimes like that's where you need to be,
Totally.
you know, and like confronting your biases and your privilege. And, you know, I think it's important for us, especially as teachers, to do that because like we need to move past our own ways of thinking and like have a better, more open view of the world, you know,
Right.
just as educators, like it's a good thing to have.
And even like having those conversations with our students at such young ages and stuff will maybe help them to not be so uncomfortable when
Exactly.
they get to be like college age.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I took AMST 2 or 4 or 1 or 4. It was the African American experience, and I think, like, I'm Asian, but that doesn't mean that I don't know, like, sorry, I don't know.
It's okay.
I wouldn't say that makes me, like, more comfortable talking about issues just because
Right.
I'm, like, colored.
Yeah.
But, it was pretty much a class full of, like, white, I guess both females and males, and then there are a few, like, I was Asian, and there are a few African Americans, but not a lot. And even though you're students of color, like, his content, like, still made me uncomfortable, and it made me look at, like, wow, I'm at Western's campus,
Yeah.
like, just being here gives me all this privilege.
Yeah,
and, like,
exactly.
gave us so many insights and questions to think about, and how, like, just being in this classroom was, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was
Yeah.
so eye-opening to be
Yeah.
in that kind of environment. And one day this girl said the N-word, and then this guy went off on a tangent on her, like, just in front
The
of her.
professor?
No.
Or another student?
Another student. And it was really uncomfortable for everyone. And, like, as a professor, you should kind of step in because he was just going off on her. But he didn't make him apologize or anything. He was kind of just like, yeah, I was going to tell you that too. And which is...
Did she say it in like a bad way?
No, she didn't say it in a bad way.
Okay.
She was just making references, but I don't know what I'm trying to get at. But it was interesting to see how, like, instead of just playing the role of, like,
It's like devil's advocate.
yeah, instead of the teacher just being like, oh, you need to back off, like,
Yeah.
I know you said this, but it's okay. He, like, told it like it was. He was
Yeah.
like, no, that's not okay
Yeah.
okay to say. Like, all of you guys are sitting here, and you guys are just perpetuating everything that we're
Yeah.
talking about it. Yeah, and it was really cool to actually have a teacher do that.
Yeah.
And, like, really challenge us, and it, like, makes me uncomfortable talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it, like, right now. And
Yeah.
it's like, should I be talking about this? But there are things that need to be talked about. And,
Totally.
Yeah.
I know it's really helpful to have people that will kind of like cheer you on and like kind of make you have those challenging
Yeah.
conversations and stuff.
Yeah.
I have a boss that works at Western, and she is always like, I'll go back to her and tell her stories like what happened with my boyfriend's dad, and she'll be like, you know what, next time that comes up, you could say this or whatever. Just really encouraging. And I think it would be really helpful to be a teacher in our classrooms that did that and encouraged students to say those types of things or did what your professor did and called it like it was.
Yeah.
Did she have any advice on how to handle a situation like that? Because it's like boyfriend's dad, like, kind of awkward.
She says to be compassionate, it's really hard not to like raise your voice or to get like super heated and kind of aggressive in those situations, but like to remember to like take breaths and to remind yourself that that person has never been exposed to something like that before. And like think back to the time in your life that you weren't exposed to this. And like growing up my whole life, I was never exposed to anything like this. So it's really easy for me to kind of relate to him and remember if somebody would have attacked me, I would have, like, walls up, I wouldn't have listened. So it's easier to come at it and be, like, compassionate kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I know I have an acquaintance, I wouldn't call her a friend exactly, from high school, and we did theater together, and I'm friends with her on Facebook. And she was talking about how she is, like, she's half Mexican. So she said that she identifies as a white person, but that when she fills out things on, like, standardized tests or, like, scholarship forms, that she always puts down that she's Hispanic. And she was talking about how, like, she didn't think there was anything, like, there's no such thing as white privilege and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh, no. And I just didn't respond because I was like, I knew this was going to be bad. And she had a bunch of people respond to her, and, like, they said it better than I could have. And so, like, sometimes I know I just have to take myself out of that situation, especially on social media, and just, like, take a step back and be like, okay, I need to think about this before I respond to this, because I don't want to do it out of anger. I want to do it out of, like, a desire to educate this person and, like, make them think about what they're saying. And so sometimes it's really hard because there's that tendency to get fired up and get angry because, like, you know it's unjust and you know, like, that's not right, you know? But how do you talk about that with someone who just will not understand, you know? So it's just so hard.
I think just the biggest thing is, like, taking deep breaths, like, taking a step back and just trying to come at it compassionately. And it's super hard, and, like, your voice shakes and you get really nervous and uncomfortable, but like you were saying before, like, that's where you need to be. You need to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, it was really big. Like, it was a big deal not for me to not respond to that. Sorry, I'm trying to find words. Because, like, usually when I see something like that on social media, I, like, write an entire essay, like, in a comment, and I'm just like, no, here's why you're wrong. But I saw, like, how other people were going about it, and I didn't think it was, like, quite the right way. Like, somebody cited an article, like, they put an article on there, which I thought was really good. Like, it was about white privilege and something about, it was written by a Latina author, and she was talking about how when you're lighter skinned, you have that option to identify as being Hispanic or as white, and, like, you need to be able to confront that, because, like, that shows white privilege right there, you know, because you're talking about, like, somebody being treated differently just because of the shade of their skin, you know? So I just think it's funny that, like, people just don't get it. They really don't. And, like, I know for me, like, it was a struggle at first to accept that, like, I am privileged because of my skin color.
Yeah, that's a huge pill to swallow for people.
Yeah, because, I mean, you feel bad about it. Like, you feel guilty because it's like, well, this isn't something I can control, but it's something that's actively happening in our society.
Right.
But what you can do is confront it and
Right.
expose like that issue to other people as well, and just talk about it. Like that's the biggest thing is
Yeah.
talking about it. So
Well, and you can use your privilege for like the better,
Yeah.
and like bring situations like these to the forefront
Mhm.
and like into your classrooms and like to your school district and that kind of thing.
It's also a matter of making the conversation happen long enough.
that's true.
Because like the incident that happened, was that last 2 months ago?
Yeah.
No one's talking about it now.
I know.
It's like,
I know.
it
It's
was such
so
a big
awful.
thing just because it blew up on social media and it's like once it blows over, it just everyone forgets and it's like,
It's
did
still
the
an
conversation
issue.
really matter if you don't
Yeah.
care enough to keep it going?
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is, I think it's really sad.
Yeah.
It is really sad.
Well, I think going into this quarter, President Shepard in his address to all of us addressed it again. But honestly, right after it happened, none of my professors were talking about it, and none of my friends were talking about it. And I had this cool opportunity to teach a college prep class at Nooksack High School last quarter, and the day that our school was closed, I went to Nooksack, and all of the students were asking me about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it like really says a lot that that campus was lit up
Yeah.
and ours wasn't.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool though because they have been making efforts for workshops and stuff, and I know that Joy did one, but that was like in the first couple of weeks of school, and I didn't really know about them. Like there are a couple of emails, but I doubt that people. I don't know. I opened my email up and just get through things.
Yeah.
But they're just like really great resources for people to have, and just like
Definitely.
opening up the critical questions and stuff. Come back to me because I forgot.
Okay. I just think it's great that we have those resources, but if people aren't using them, like,
or if the resources are in the basement or really hard to find on campus, then that poses a huge issue too.
yeah,
So.
because then it's not like accessible for everyone, and you want. I feel like we should make a bigger deal out of it, you know, just because like people need to talk about these things, especially like not feeling safe when you're walking around campus. Like I can't even. Well, I can kind of imagine because of like the incidents that have been happening with like the sexual assault stuff that's been happening.
Yeah.
Like that scares me, but being white, like I don't have to worry about being targeted specifically because I am white, you know? And it's so awful to think that like some people every day have to worry about that. Like, I just couldn't even imagine, which is why, like, I can be an ally and I can stand with people when they're going through these things, but I will never experience that. And I think that's another thing that, like, that needs to be talked about because you can try to empathize with those situations, but really what you need to do is just be there to support and like be an advocate for change, you know?
Right. And to spread awareness and things like that. I think a lot of, I think some of like our student body when campus was closed the day before Thanksgiving break, took it as, I am so excited to be with my family for an extra day, and not so much of a like, let's rally together and think about this huge event that just occurred.
And then when we came back, one of my teachers, I love her, so I hate saying this, but she went up to the front of the class and she was like, she addressed how she knew that there were issues going on that needed to be talked about, but we were falling behind. And it's in class, in her content, and it's just like, how can anything get done if you can't talk about things? Because, and that's the other thing about being teachers, like there are things you're going to need to do, but you need to know when to step back and like talk about actual issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you guys ever learn about like the hierarchy of needs? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah.
I always think about that when I think about teaching, because if like a student walks into your class and they're hungry, you give them a granola bar, or if they're like they smell, and you give them deodorant, or you know, whatever. And same goes for this type of situation. If a student walks into your classroom and they're crying, or they're not even visibly upset, but there's a huge issue going on your campus, then it needs to be talked about, because otherwise no one can focus on your lesson.
Yeah.
If their stomach is growling, no one can focus on your lesson. Just like if these events are in the back of their mind, no one's going to be able to think about what you're teaching them. So, yeah. Which is why I think that these books are super helpful to have in your class, because then those conversations are easier to have if they haven't been introduced.
Definitely. Yeah.
We could talk about and how we related.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
The mirror window.
I had never done anything like this. I don't know about you guys, but like the whole mirror window thing, like I've never had a teacher or professor like explicitly say, I want you to think about these things. Like, how do you see yourself in this? And like, what perspective do you see that you haven't experienced? And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because then it makes it like so much more like reading the book. And you're like, oh, this is how I identify with this. Like, even if you were like subconsciously identifying with some of the parts, like actually writing it out is like a really good exercise, I think.
I feel like I see a lot of teachers kind of doing that, but not so much in the sense where they like kind of want them to see like culturally lies. It's more just like, okay, I want you to get like this text-to-text feeling, so you can kind of connect with them. So then later you can write about it, and then that gets you into writing, and then great, now we're writing.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not so much like let's really dig down and like think about this type of thing.
I always have a really easy time seeing how I relate to a character, and like I've always, I don't know, probably that's human nature to see how you relate to a character. And but I had a really hard time thinking, how did I not relate to her? You know what I mean? Because I always just automatically think, oh, everything. I
relate to that.
But one of the things that I wrote down was I can't relate to her because I've never had anyone tell me you cannot be friends with someone because of their race or because of anything, really. I've always just, as a kid, that just kind of would have gone over my head. So.
And I was like looking at all of our posts, and I think that was kind of like a common theme almost.
Yeah.
Like I wrote this down, and I looked at your guys, and I was like, oh, I think I said the same thing.
I know for me, like, I saw it more in, like, the actions of the girls, and, like, I remember I was a weird kid, like, in elementary school. I was just kind of quiet, and I, like, kept to myself, and when I was, like, really little, I would make friends like that, but then I started, like, getting self-conscious, and then you're like, I don't know if I belong. And so I kind of felt like I related to the little girl who was sitting on the fence, and she was like, she wasn't like invited to play with the other kids, and like I feel like sometimes they're just unconscious things like holding you back from doing something like that, even if it's not based on like societal norms. Like this was like pretty obviously about segregation and things like that. Like I think there is sometimes this pressure to not do something because, like, you feel like you're gonna have your feelings hurt, or, you know, like, you're just not wanting to be disappointed. So I think it's really cool that this little girl, like, was able to just be like, hey, I want to be friends with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she like actively pursued that, and she wanted to include her in her friend group, and I thought that was so cool.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That was really cool. But I know what you mean about like society kind of telling you that you can't do something, but doing it anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah. I always have to like have a conversation with myself and be like, who cares?
Yeah.
Do it.
And my mirror was a little bit.
We have a meeting here at 9.
Okay. We'll be out of there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we can just like drop it. It's fine. We can keep going for a little bit. You were saying something about the mirror.
Oh, I saw myself, and well, first I was just thinking about asking questions and always being curious about like, oh, what's on the other side. But I also saw myself when the girl was sitting on the fence, and like, she would look over and she would like kind of get a glimpse of things, but there's always something holding her back from really knowing. And I kind of made a vague, well, not really a vague connection to traveling, but I guess I could relate this to everything, but just like the whole race thing, you could sit on the fence, you can like cross it, but you'll never really know.
Yeah.
So that's how I said I'm related.
Yeah.
Just to all the things I want to know in the world,
Yeah.
but I just won't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like scratching the surface.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Mine was just like, I kind of said like in my neighborhood, like people kept like coming and going, and like there was just like only a few of us who kind of like stayed in the neighborhood, and so like I kind of related it to like just the girls like making friends, and so like I was always that person who's like, okay, there's like this new person on the block, let's go make friends with them, and like and then like all the other girls that I knew like who stayed in the neighborhood were just like, I don't know, like, you know, maybe we shouldn't, and then like in the end we were just kind of like, oh, why? Like we're all here, we're all in the same neighborhood.
Safari on instead
Yeah.
of
All right. So should we come up with a muddy question?
Yeah.
this is a Mac.
What was the definition of that?
Okay.
So it's just basically something that wasn't clear, we want to know more about, or
Okay.
Okay, I have a hard time, like, knowing,
But
okay, I have a hard time
I'll get that taken
identifying
care of
stereotypes.
next week.
Probably because they're so overused, and I'm kind of used to seeing them. So I would like to know more about identifying stereotypes when I see them. Having like more skills.
Oh.
so that was how do we identify stereotypes in children's literature?
More skills on that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.